My fiancé told me he lost his job, but the twist? He was actually the owner of the company and had been testing me to see how I'd react to financial hardship. It was a Friday night, and I was dead on my feet from another brutal week at the law office. I work as a paralegal, which means my day is full of other people's problems, and tonight, I just wanted to relax. My fiancé, Lucas, and I had made plans to celebrate his recent work milestone, a huge deal he closed for his real estate company, or so I thought. But instead of the Lucas I expected, lively and practically glowing from success, the man who walked through my front door looked crushed. "Hey, babe," I said, leaning in for a hug, only to feel him tense under my touch. "You okay?" He avoided my eyes, a hand ruffling through his messy hair. "Leah, can we just sit down for a second?" Alarm bells went off in my head immediately. Lucas was a guy who thrived on routine, steady as they come. If he wanted to sit down, it usually meant something was wrong. We moved to the couch, and he sank down with a sigh, running his hands over his face. "Leah," he started, his voice shaky. "I lost my job today." I stared at him, waiting for him to say something else, maybe crack a grin and laugh it off. But there was nothing. Just silence and the dim lights from the street casting shadows across his face. "What? How?" I sputtered.
"Lucas, I thought you were doing so well."
"You just closed that big deal last week. Are you sure they didn't make a mistake?" He shook his head, his eyes glued to the floor. "No mistake. They're restructuring the whole department. New management's decided to go in a different direction. It's all political crap, you know how it is." I didn't know how it was. Lucas was the successful one, the one who kept us grounded. I'd grown up in a family where job security was more of a myth than a reality, so I thought I'd finally left those days behind me. And now, hearing him say he was unemployed felt like a cruel cosmic joke. "So, what happens now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up at me, and there was a vulnerability in his eyes I'd never seen before. "I don't know, Leah. I honestly don't know." I reached for his hand, trying to be strong, though my mind was spinning. "Whatever it takes, Lucas, we'll figure it out. We'll make a plan." He nodded, squeezing my hand weakly, but I could feel the weight of something unspoken between us. I told myself that he just needed time, but even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. In the days that followed, Lucas was a ghost of himself. He stopped going to the gym, barely touched his food, and couldn't even bring himself to look at job postings. I'd come home after long hours at the office, hoping he'd found something, anything, to lift his spirits. But every day, it was the same. A cold, defeated stare. He'd just shrug whenever I asked about his progress, mumbling things like, "It's complicated, Leah. Give me time." One evening, as we sat eating dinner in silence, I finally cracked. "Lucas, I can't keep doing this," I said, setting down my fork. "You've been out of work for 2 weeks, and you're barely even trying. Don't you think we need to talk about how we're going to handle this?" He looked up, his face a mixture of guilt and irritation. "I get it, Leah. You think I'm just sitting here wallowing, but it's not that simple." "Then make it simple for me," I snapped, my voice louder than I'd intended. "I want to help you, but I can't do that if you keep shutting me out." He stared at me for a long moment before dropping his gaze again. "You wouldn't understand." That hit a nerve. "Wouldn't understand?" "Lucas, I've spent my entire life trying to make ends meet. I know what it's like to struggle, probably better than you ever will." He scoffed, the sound surprising me. "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you've been coasting on my success." The words were like a slap in the face. I stared at him, stunned. Lucas had always been supportive of me, always encouraged my work, my dreams. To hear him say that. "Wow," I managed, barely keeping my voice steady. "So that's what you think? That I'm with you for your money?" He looked away, regret flashing across his face, but it was too late. The damage was done. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I lay awake, my mind racing. His words echoed in my head, twisting my feelings of sympathy and worry into something darker, something resentful. I'd been nothing but supportive, yet he'd thrown it in my face like it meant nothing. I decided I needed answers. So, while he slept, I slipped out of bed and quietly opened his laptop. It was something I'd never done before, and guilt tugged at me, but my curiosity won out. I felt like I was losing him, and I had to know why. When I opened his email, a message caught my eye. It was from the company's board, dated only days ago, discussing his upcoming role in an executive restructuring plan. My heart sank as I skimmed the email. Lucas hadn't been laid off. In fact, he was still very much employed. Not only that, he was being congratulated for his new title as CEO. The realization hit me like a freight train. He hadn't lost his job at all. He'd lied. The next morning, I waited until he woke up, my hands shaking with anger and betrayal. As soon as he stepped into the kitchen, I held up his laptop. "Care to explain this, Lucas?" I demanded, my voice dangerously calm. He froze, his eyes darting from me to the screen. He knew exactly what I'd found. Leah, I can explain. Oh, you'd better, I said, crossing my arms. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you didn't lose your job at all. In fact, you got a promotion. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, but there was no escaping it now. You weren't supposed to find out like this. Oh really? I scoffed. How was I supposed to find out, Lucas? After another month of watching you mope around while I budget every cent to keep us afloat? What the hell is wrong with you? He looked down, a mixture of shame and defiance in his eyes. I needed to know, Leah. I needed to know if you'd stay with me if things got tough. I let out a bitter laugh. Are you serious? This was some kind of test? Lucas, I've been working my ass off, picking up extra hours, all because I thought you were struggling. And all along, it was just. What? A game to see if I was worthy of you? It wasn't a game, he snapped, finally looking at me with frustration. You don't understand what I've been through. My last girlfriend left me the second things got tough financially. I thought you were different, but I needed to be sure. I stared at him, disgusted. And the only way you could think of was to lie to me? Manipulate me? People lie to get the truth sometimes, he shot back, his tone defensive. I'm sorry, Leah, but I had to be sure. I couldn't risk going through that again. Risk? Risk? I shook my head in disbelief. Lucas, you didn't risk anything. I'm the one who's been left in the dark, wondering how we'd pay the bills. I'm the one who's been worrying about you. And for what? So you could see if I'd stick around when you lost it all? That's sick. His face softened, the anger replaced by something closer to regret. Leah, I love you. I needed to know if you loved me, too. Not for the money, but for me. I stepped back, suddenly feeling like I couldn't breathe. You don't get it, do you? Love isn't about proving yourself through some twisted test. It's about trust, Lucas. And you just destroyed that. For the next few days, I barely spoke to him. He kept apologizing, kept saying he'd made a mistake, that he hadn't meant to hurt me. But I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the realization that he'd been willing to manipulate me so easily, just to satisfy his own insecurities. One night, after another tense silence over dinner, he looked at me with desperation. Leah, I'm sorry, he said quietly. I messed up, and I know that. But please. I don't want to lose you. I looked at him, feeling the weight of his words, the sincerity in his eyes. But it wasn't enough. The hurt, the anger, it was all still there, raw and unhealed. I need time, Lucas, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Time to figure out if I can forgive you. And if I even want to. In the weeks that followed, I moved back in with my sister, needing space to sort through my feelings without his constant presence. I missed him, sure, but the pain he'd caused lingered. Slowly, though, I began to see that his actions, as misguided as they were, had come from a place of vulnerability. He'd been hurt before, just like me, and that fear had led him to make a terrible mistake. Eventually, we started seeing each other again, cautiously rebuilding what we'd almost lost. Lucas promised never to let his insecurities come between us again, and I promised to work on my own trust issues. It wasn't perfect, and some days were harder than others. But over time, we found a new rhythm, one built on honesty, no more tests, no more lies. And while things between us may never be quite the same, I'll never forget the lesson I learned. Trust isn't something you can test. It's something you build, together, every single day. Over the next few months, things were tentative but steady. I felt like I'd been split in two. One part of me wanted desperately to move forward, to let Lucas's betrayal be just a painful chapter in our story, but another part of me, a louder, angrier part, couldn't let it go. This wasn't just some small misstep, it was a massive, orchestrated lie. Every time I remembered how he'd sat there watching me scramble, pick up extra hours, cut back on my own spending just to support us through his hardship, the resentment burned. It didn't help that, in the meantime, Lucas's career was skyrocketing. Turns out his promotion to CEO wasn't just a big deal, it was the deal. Every paper in Denver was talking about him, how his sharp instincts were shaking up the real estate industry. Meanwhile, he'd walk around with that smirk, always managing to look just humble enough to not seem too smug, just cocky enough to let everyone know he was on top. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I realized that if he could test me, it was only fair I gave him a taste of his own medicine. My idea began to form one night over dinner with my friend Jana, the same one who had first suspected Lucas was hiding something. She was sipping her wine, listening to me rant about how Lucas's experiment had left me questioning every part of our relationship. What if you taught him a lesson? She suggested, raising an eyebrow. What do you mean? I asked, my interest piqued. Give him his own test. If he's so obsessed with proving loyalty, why don't you show him what it feels like? She leaned forward, a wicked glint in her eye. And do it in a way he'll never see coming. It took some time, but with Jana's help, I crafted a plan. It was bold, maybe even a bit cruel, but after everything Lucas had put me through, I thought he deserved every bit of it. A few weeks later, I put the first part of my plan into action. I casually mentioned to Lucas that I was invited to a legal conference in Chicago and would be gone for a few days. This was nothing new, I'd been to plenty of conferences before, so he didn't think twice about it. Of course, I wasn't going to Chicago. I was going to set up the perfect trap. Over the past few months, I'd saved up enough to rent an Airbnb in the heart of Denver, just a few blocks away from his office. With Jana's help, I transformed the place into a cozy, professional-looking home office for a mysterious, well-off investor interested in real estate, a woman with no face, no name, but plenty of money and connections. Through some anonymous emails and well-placed calls, I set up a meeting between Lucas and this investor, pitching it as an opportunity for him to connect with a mysterious but influential figure in the industry. The day of the meeting, I dressed the part, donning a sleek black wig, glasses, and a tailored suit that transformed me. With some contouring and a more mature look, I was completely unrecognizable. I looked every bit the powerful, intriguing woman Lucas would be dying to impress. When Lucas arrived, I watched from a shadowed corner of the room as he walked in, looking confident, every inch the ambitious CEO. He glanced around, slightly surprised by the dim lighting and the open bottle of vintage wine set on the table. I'd set up the scene perfectly. "Good evening, Mr. Grant," I said, keeping my voice lower than usual, a soft, subtle rasp. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Lucas offered his most charming smile, visibly trying to gauge this investor. "It's a pleasure. I've heard a lot about you. Although it seems you're as mysterious as people say." I smiled, gesturing for him to sit. "Well, in this business, sometimes mystery is the best currency." We chatted about vague investment opportunities, keeping things just businesslike enough to hold his interest but personal enough to get him comfortable. I watched him, studying the way he spoke, the calculated way he leaned in when he thought he had the upper hand. I kept playing my part, drawing him in. At one point, he tried to get personal. "I have to say," he began, his tone suave, "you don't come across like most of the investors I work with. You have a unique approach." I smirked, leaning in. "Well, I do believe that in business, as in life, loyalty is paramount. Don't you agree?" He nodded earnestly, oblivious to the trap I was setting. "Absolutely. Without trust, what do you really have?" I gave a small laugh, bitterness creeping into my voice. "Interesting you'd say that, Mr. Grant. Because from what I understand, you're a man who loves to test that loyalty." He stiffened, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. I'm sorry? "Let's not waste each other's time," I said, my voice sharper now, leaning forward until I was just inches from his face. "Tell me, how did it feel to test your fiancé's loyalty by faking financial hardship? Did it make you feel powerful? In control?" He went pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Leah?" "Surprise," I said, taking off the glasses and pulling off the wig. His face went from confusion to horror as realization dawned on him. "Didn't expect me, did you?"
Leah, I don't.
"What is this?" He looked around, as if hoping it was some elaborate joke. "Oh, Lucas, this is nothing but a little lesson. You wanted to know if I'd stay with you when things got hard? Well, congratulations, you'll get to find out for real." "Wait, please, Leah, let me explain," he stammered, reaching out as I stood up. "No, Lucas. You've said enough." I took a deep breath, letting him see the pain in my eyes, the betrayal that had fueled my plan. "You were willing to manipulate me, lie to me, all because you didn't trust me enough to love you without a twisted test. So now, here's my answer, I don't love you. Not anymore. Not after what you did." His face fell, and he looked like a man whose whole world was crumbling. "Leah, please, I'm sorry. I was an idiot.
I
love you, and I didn't want to lose you." I shook my head, my voice steady. "Funny, Lucas. Because thanks to your test, you just did." I left that Airbnb with my head held high, my heart racing. The satisfaction was immediate, but the finality of it settled in slowly. I blocked his number, ignored the desperate emails and texts that followed, and focused on moving forward. It was hard, God, it was hard, but every time I thought about going back, I remembered how he'd watched me suffer while he held all the cards, and my resolve steeled. Within a few months, I'd moved into a new apartment and poured myself into my work. Jana and I would meet up occasionally, and every time she'd laugh, raising her glass to the great investor scheme and my boldest decision yet. As for Lucas? The last I heard, his career wasn't as smooth as he'd hoped. Word got out about his quirky trust issues, and, turns out, investors and board members alike weren't exactly charmed by a CEO who played mind games with those closest to him. His reputation took a hit, and while his name still floated around in industry circles, the respect once attached to it had faded. In the end, I learned something priceless: love built on manipulation is a weak foundation, destined to crumble. Lucas may have started the test, but I finished it. And as for loyalty? I finally found it again, in myself.